At the end of the day, negotiators working for the UN, their role is mediating between these member states with different interests. But the UN is, what some people might call a meta-organization. So it's an organization constituted by other organizations, the member states. So there's a question of who is sovereignty, right?
Welcome to the Research for Good podcast. My name's Professor David Ellis, and today I'm joined by Dr Friederike Döbbe, who's an Assistant Professor of Business and Society. Hello.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about your area of research?
Yeah, so I'm in organization management research, and specifically I look into climate change and sustainability of food systems. And I'm a qualitative researcher and kind of coming from somewhat more critical angles.
So what got you interested in that in the first place? Of all the things you could do in general, but also within organizational management, why those topics?
So I think it was really the reason for, these kind of empirical interests were the reason for why I started the PhD in the beginning, so why I got into research. I did my master's in environmental policy and regulation. So I had an interest in environmental issues and kind of the politics around it, but also the interactions between, these kind of political topics and other actors, businesses, consumers. And then I landed in a business school in Sweden and pursued these interests.
So was your undergrad in management?
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So you went sort of management, sort of social policy,
environmental policy,
and then back to management.
And then back to management, and then kind of bringing these interests together there. Yeah, and it took me quite some time, I think, to within management to kind of find my academic home, so to say. To kind of, go into depth, like understanding the literature. I think every PhD, spends quite some time of doing that, understanding the different camps, different discussions.
And so that interest in the environment, where did that come from? Was that always something before you even did your first degree, or was that always there? Or?
I think so. I think from school. I really liked geography in school, but I never, pursued a career in geography. I think people were like, oh, you're never going to find a job, and I probably listened too much to these voices. But then I kind of ended up in that space again. I mean, my master's was in a geography department, and now, I think the research that I do, some of it could equally be done from, someone who's in geography.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's one of the things that strikes me about management schools is that the number of people who say, well, I could be in this department, but I'm in management.
Yeah, exactly.
So you've just published a paper that's on consensus and the environment and the UN. I've just come out with the top.
Yeah, those are really good keywords.
Yeah, can you tell me a bit about that work?
Yeah, definitely. So this is a paper that I've been working on with Daniel Nyberg, he was one of my co-supervisors during my PhD. And I started the project initially by myself, but then, throughout the process, we started to co-author, and he's based in Australia at the University of Queensland.
Mm-hmm.
But so the paper it's one of my PhD papers, as I said, so it's been with me for quite a while, first during the PhD and then the whole publication process, which is another story. It's long, years. I think it must have been like 5-6 years, something like that in total, from kind of starting the empirical work, writing, and then the publishing process. But
so can you say a little bit about the empirical work? What did you do?
Definitely. So I mentioned my interest in climate change and food systems, right? So kind of sustainability of food. And when I started my PhD, it was this intersection that I found particularly interesting. I think the debates, back then about climate change had been a lot about the fossil fuel industry, the energy sector, but food as a theme was kind of, coming up more and more then. But it's quite contested. I think, we all have some relation to food, right? We need it every day, but it's emotional, it's cultural, it has to do with health, food security, the natural environment. So there's a lot of things coming together.
So what do you mean when you say contested?
There's different positions, different interests about, what should food be about? You know,
Okay.
what should, say, a sustainable diet, as this is a key topic of my paper.
So in contrast to sort of like fossil fuels, where there's a kind of bit more of a clear line of like, you know, we want to reduce our use of fossil fuels, there's maybe more of a consensus there, where there's, when we come to food, there's less of a consensus.
I think for fossil fuels, it's also contested.
Yeah,
it's
sure.
also, you know, a topic that's deeply political in the sense of that there is actors with different interests and powerful actors like the fossil fuel industry that try to maintain kind of their business as usual, and there's lots of research on this that my co-author has actually been involved in. But I think food is slightly different. It's a really interesting question that you're asking me, and I have to reflect about it a bit myself. But I think it is different in the sense of that it brings together other policy domains, if you want to call it that, right? Food is relevant to health policy, you know, topics like malnutrition. It's relevant to food security. I mean, if we're looking at, you know, the political conflicts in the world right now, food security always becomes an issue. That's also relevant to the environmental domain, and it's very cultural and personal also.
So coming back to your paper, what did that research involve? What did you do?
So I started to study what is the United Nations doing on the topic of sustainable food consumption in particular, which led me to this notion of sustainable diets. And when I started my PhD, I was really kind of more or less naively going, you know, out there doing interviews to trying to understand, okay, like, what are the issues and solutions here within this area of sustainable diets? What's the work that they're doing? And as part of this process, I realized pretty quickly how contested, how challenged this notion of sustainable diets itself was. Meaning that different actors within, you know, the umbrella of the United Nations, of different member states, would have different positions on this concept. Some being very much on board, saying like, yes, this is a relevant area to pursue. You know, we should think more about what does sustainable diets mean. How can we, you know, write guidelines that you know, countries can then pick up on and apply in their own, you know, national realms. But there were also other countries that did not want to talk about this concept at all. So they were really resisting its uptake in, you know, different policy documents.
And so in this work, when you're doing the research, are you doing interviews with people, or are you looking at pre-existing countries? What was the kind of method that you're...
So it was a combination of looking at documents, so specifically the documents were sustainable diets, and then kind of, you know, later version of that notion, of that frame were defined, but also documents. So I interviewed people that worked in the United Nations on the topic of sustainable diets.
And how'd you get people from? I mean, people listening will think, how'd you manage to speak to people from the United Nations? You just drop them an email, or
I reached out.
Okay.
Yeah, this was during COVID, so all of, you know, the interviews took place online, and it was quite fascinating, you know, to see how it then became possible to actually talk to people that are in, you know, very high level positions, but also that work in places all over the globe. So that's been really one of the advantages, I think, of doing this research online. Yeah, so I reached out and you know, kind of made sure that these were people that worked on this topic in particular, not just, you know, people in other domains. But yeah.
And so, how did what those people were saying line up with the documents that you were looking at? Or did it line up?
Yeah, it did. So the documents that I looked at, they are over a longer period of time of around, I think it was around 10, 11 years. And the interviews, I mean, they are retrospective, right? So I talked to people about, you know, the developments around this concept and when they were working on it. And so it kind of matched then the periods that they were talking about in the interviews to the periods of time that I looked at in the document.
Were people quite candid in their interviews? Was there things they didn't want to talk about, or was it...
I think it depends a bit. I mean, I guess with all interviews you have, you know, some people that are more open than others. Sure. Yeah. But and so it depends a bit, I think, to who you speak to and in what role they are, how they are trained.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but yeah, they were. I mean, they were very open, and I'm very grateful for their participation.
Well, I mean, it's probably difficult to sort of say this in a short phrase, but what was the main finding from this work?
Yeah.
I'm guessing there wasn't just one. But
No,
feel free to
exactly.
elaborate on that.
I mean, theoretically, what we did is, so we looked at sustainable diets through a perspective of framing.
Okay.
The frame is essentially a schemata of interpretation.
Yep.
You can think about a picture frame, right? Like things that become more or less salient. So sustainable diets as a frame. And what we see in the space of the UN, where the idea of consensus is really driving the work of these actors, is that whenever consensus on a topic, in this case our frame of sustainable diets, becomes challenged, becomes contested, actors revise this frame, this idea. So you can think of it really in a dialectical way. So you have the frame sustainable diets becomes contested, becomes challenged. UN secretariats then mediate between the different member states with the different interests to come up with a new consensus. And as part of that, they revise the frame. So you have this movement, contestation, mediation, revision, and a new frame. What we then found is that as part of this process of consensus seeking, the contentious issues within that frame, the things that were debated that actors could not find agreement on, they were over time almost like phased out. So we found that they were compartmentalized into kind of different boxes, where you can have one box of issues that you can agree on, the health aspects of diets in our case, but sustainability, that's kind of put into another box. And how then that link, this kind of element of linking sustainability to diets, how that over time was then subverted. So it was replaced by other elements.
I wonder if you could explain a bit about how that consensus framing shift.
So empirically, I mean, we found three versions of the frame, so to say. In the beginning, it was sustainable diets, which if you look at the kind of definition of sustainable diets that they come up with, it's very integrative. So it, it considers different elements: health, environmental sustainability, culture, the economy. So that was kind of the starting point. But despite being so integrative of different interests, that frame got contested. And what we kind of see in the paper, it's certain member states being afraid that this idea, sustainable diets, might mean we can no longer eat meat and dairy. So it's kind of specifically an interest in the livestock industry. It seemed that led to the contestation of that frame. And then, as I said, there were kind of two rounds of revision of that frame. So after the first revision, where the frame was compartmentalized, the new frame consensus was empirically on sustainable, healthy diets. And so here we call this an antagonistic frame consensus, where essentially as part of this compartmentalization, the health and the environmental sustainability aspects, they are both still included in the frame, but they're in tension with each other. And then after the kind of second round of revision, the final frame consensus that they found was the evasive one. And here the frame was healthy diets through sustainable food systems. So healthy diets was kept, but the emphasis was shifted through achieving them through food systems, which is a much broader idea than connecting environmental sustainability to diets.
So it's the idea of things that are kind of more antagonistic or sort of removed or pushed to the side to focus on the things that there is this kind of alignment with, or it's less argumentative,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. The contentious elements of that frame were subverted, they were excluded, they were removed.
And I guess, there are like the pros and cons of that, right? The pros are that you do get some consensus.
Exactly.
And something because ultimately we're talking about policy changes, but this does affect everybody in the at some level potentially. But the negative of it is, are things been put to the side that actually are fundamental, or could be fundamental, even once you get to the end of the process? And actually it's like, oh, we missed that, so we have to go back to the beginning.
Exactly. So it's the masking of differences.
You know, I think from the UK perspective, and sort of, you know, the way that laws are made and they go through various chambers and things are amended or not amended, I just wonder how much that process is happening. And I think especially, I mean, in settings where the decision-making process is not based on a majority rule, but based on these kind of on deliberations for consensus. I mean, in Germany, where I'm from, on a municipal level, you have also these processes of consensus seeking. So, I think the insights I've got are relevant to other settings. So I think that's what I'm struck by, is a sort of the potential generalizability.
I'm glad you saw that. Nice, because we focus, I mean, then on that context of multilateralism, right, where you have these mediator actors, so to say, which are the secretariats. But I think the general idea of consensus seeking, that's also applicable to other settings.
You talk in the paper, I think, about evasive consensus at one point. And you kind of say that's a way of, like, I mean, I think the term evasive consensus could be applied to a lot of things, actually, apart from this. But is that a rational strategy that's used to keep people at a table?
Yeah, I think so. I think what we see is that so through this like processual take on consensus, or how does consensus change over time, we find different versions of consensus, the evasive one being one of them. Right? In the beginning, consensus was integrative. So, you know, by saying like, oh, I agree with, you know, all of your positions, you come to consensus. But there's there's an ambiguity and a vagueness in that.
So is that not just dishonest if someone's evasively consensus?
Oh, good question.
If you were advising a UN negotiator to push a more ambitious frame on something, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I think this is a really difficult question, because I think at the end of the day, negotiators working for the UN, I think they're, you know, doing the best they can. Their role is, you know, they're mediating between these member states with different interests. But at the end of the day, the UN is, you know, what some people might call a meta-organization. So it's an organization constituted by other organizations, the member states. So there's a question of who is sovereignty, right? Is it the secretariats who, you know, might try to set out an agenda, sustainable diets in our case, or then the member states who say, well, but we are the United Nations. If I was to advise them, I mean, if one could find a way of sticking to these differences more, you know, saying, well, yes, we disagree, but can we try to work this out more? Can we sit down?
Rather than evading it.
That I think would be an ideal. How to do that in practice, I mean, that would be a good next research project, probably.
You've been listening to the Research for Good podcast. To find out more about research in the School of Management, you can visit our website or click the links in the episode description.